Hey, we want to welcome you back to another episode of Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga,
And I'm Gary.
and we are doing this screen to screen rather than face to face, but I think we've got some good conversation to bring forward today. So as I have tended to do in the past, I'll have a really impactful conversation with somebody and it just gets me thinking, and I've got, statements that I've been mulling through all day. And so there was a pretty impactful one, and I think you've got kind of a counterpart to the statement, but I wanted to talk about this concept. So the statement goes something like this: doing I'm going to say, quote unquote, right thing becomes a, quote, harmful thing when you are perpetuating false or incorrect narratives about yourself or others. And so I'm going to just pause and let you give your feedback on that.
Well, I mean, my goodness, that's one of those fun, complicated sentences to say that gets you thinking and gets, well, you and I curious, right?
Mhm.
And that's the whole purpose of this podcast. And there's so many curious things and so many questions about that. You know, who's to judge whether something is enabling poor, bad, harmful, dysfunctional behavior?
Mm,
You didn't say all those words, but I'm going to give a range now
yeah.
instead of just poor behavior, right? Um, and then what are the two people's parts? There's two parts in any relationship. If one is contributing 5% and the other is 95%, well then, how much influence do you have?
Sure.
And who's to say that this is a relationship that's not good? In other words, when the statement is absolutely true in that it says may
Mm,
or can. So sure, any behavior that you think is the right thing to do, which is a whole nother question, right?
yeah.
What's the right thing to do? That's pretty subjective. I often operate on the what's the next indicated thing to do,
Mm,
um, thinking about my whole environment around me versus just my old ideas or what somebody tells me to do.
mhm.
But let's say it is the right thing to do. By definition, it may become the wrong thing to do in the wrong circumstance. And that's all that that statement is saying. But it is a really good statement in that it at least makes us think about things that we're doing.
Mhm.
As we go through life, we often develop patterns.
Mhm.
Patterns help us make it through life because if we had to redecide what we were going to do 976 times per day, we wouldn't survive it.
Yeah.
And that goes with relationships too. And so we develop healthy and unhealthy patterns with those around us, whether that's children, spouses, parents, friends, strangers, lovers, whoever it is.
Yeah.
And so when you have those patterns, I think the basic question and curious question there is this working for us
Mm,
in a relationship? If it is, well, then there's no reason to really question it. If it is not, well, then you should question it whether that relationship is made up of behaviors that are the right thing to do or not.
yeah. I think for me, I have to go back to the beginning and reevaluate that statement in the sense of, where does my idea of the right thing come from, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I, grew up in a Christian household and a Bible believing household that has the tenets of Christian faith around, love your neighbor, but also love your enemy, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so there is definitely a standard that is deeply entrenched and ingrained in me of what the right thing is. And so I find it curious and challenging and difficult, I guess those are the same words, in the fact that if my presumption is me, we've talked about this before, helping the Samaritan on the side of the road, right? Someone who's fallen by the wayside, somebody who needs assistance. If my assumption is I have to help that person because of the tenets of my faith, and I act upon it without fully evaluating the situation, I could potentially cause harm if my action is I'm going to give this person who has a sign on the side of the road who says, I'm hungry, I just need a few bucks, and I hand somebody $5 out the car window and they end up buying fentanyl and overdosing and dying, right? Like my perception of a good act could turn bad. And so it's a whole thing to think through this. And I certainly am not trying to make everybody second guess about their attempts to do good in the world and their attempts to, love and care for and nurture our fellow man. But it was a statement that gave me pause today.
And it should give everyone pause, because the one thing we should not do is not evaluate our relationships and our lives and our actions from time to time. And so I think what that statement does in a very positive way is to say, am I perpetuating bad patterns? Am I perpetuating things that are not good,
Mhm,
either for me or for the recipient, or both?
mhm,
Right? I mean, if you run across the situation of the Good Samaritan, and the same thing happens again next week with the same person, and then the next week, and then the
mhm,
next week, and that person has alternative routes, and that person seems to be to you to just kind of getting themselves in that situation over and over and over again. You're the rescuer, they're the rescuee.
mhm,
At some point, you might want to say, look, you need to take a different route.
mhm.
You need to walk in a different place. You need to do, if it's possible, of course.
Sure,
Um, and there's a lot of assumptions even in that, but I'm just saying you might want to take pause, right? If you're, I mean, much simpler situation, but think about raising kids. A lot of my lessons came from that.
sure,
A lot of people say don't spoil your kids, or don't protect your kids, or don't do their homework for them.
sure.
um, you know, Helping a child with homework is the right thing to do. If
Mhm,
they're stuck and they're asking for help, wow, good. You recognize you need to ask for help and you ask for help. Good job. But if that becomes doing their homework for them every night, by the time they get to high school, they're going to be in some real trouble, right? and
yeah.
and so again, and that goes to even a right thing or even a good thing, right? Can become a bad thing if it's creating a pattern that's not
Yeah.
useful.
Yeah. No, and I think that example is a really valid one, probably more so than the helping the person on the side of the road. With good intentions and the right heart, we want to be involved in our children's lives. We want to give them the leg up. We want to assist them as best as we can. But if we are perpetuating a cycle where they can only go forward when we get involved to help them, we have crippled them from being able to take action on their own, right? So the good thing has then become a bad thing. And so it is worth considering, especially when we have a very strong internal barometer about what the good action is, because we may want to step forward and be the rescuer or help in a particular way. But if we just do it without some evaluation about both our own motives, our own perspectives, our own, frame of mind, and the person that we're trying to assist, we could accidentally fall into the, good becoming bad category.
My kids, it was a joke in our house that seventh and eighth grade were the toughest years for my kids, because we kind of coddle them. Oh, hey, could you bring this project to school? I forgot it at home.
Hmm.
Da 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 da. That happens all the time when you're in elementary school. Well, when you start getting into the high school and that stuff kind of matters, well, seventh and eighth grade's the time to kind of mess up and fail. And oh well, you should have thought of that. I'm perfectly capable of dropping what I'm doing and coming and getting your project and bring it to you at school and try to make up my work later today or tomorrow, but I'm not gonna,
Yeah,
right? And that's tough, right?
sure.
It's a tough thing to do, but one could argue it's the right thing to do in that situation. Now you don't want to go overboard
Yeah,
with anything, right? And I think maybe that's the rule to think about with all of this is, moderation, right? You never want to go overboard with any kind of a pattern.
yeah.
But and if it becomes a pattern where you're rescuing your child on a weekly basis for something that they forgot from school or didn't do, or you're doing something, then you've got to address that.
Well, and we've heard the expression you can do the right thing for the wrong motives or the wrong
Exactly.
action. And this is a little bit different than that, but I think it really is parallel to it because we certainly can fall into patterns of doing things because we think it's our job, right? If I believe I'm the rescuer and I continue to interact with somebody in the role of rescuer, am I robbing them of the opportunity to learn and be self-sufficient and be productive in all of those things because I have established myself in a particular space and I am not challenging them to grow up and out of a place of them being stuck, right? And so maybe even the motivation's right in the sense of I'm going to be sacrificial, I'm going to do this good thing, I'm going to do this right thing. But if you continue to do the good, right thing on repeat, it can cause a false identification, I think, probably for you and the recipient.
And I think sometimes a longer view can sometimes help on this.
Yeah.
You know, on an individual basis, helping out your child when they left something at home to bring it to school is absolutely a no-brainer. But when you're starting to think, if you take a long view and you say, what is my job here? My role is to make sure that by the time they're 18 or whatever age, fill in the blank these days, that they can be self-sufficient. They can make their own decisions. They can understand the consequences of their own actions.
Mhm.
Well, then that makes a different perspective, doesn't it? I mean,
Sure.
obviously, if you can help somebody, we should in most cases.
Mm.
But when it becomes enabling of bad behaviors, well, then it's not good.
Yeah. Now, you had an expression that somebody shared with you that I found to be very intriguing that was presented kind of in a marriage seminar setting. Can you share that?
Yeah. By the way, the marriage seminar setting, well, I think every married couple ought to go to a marriage seminar once a year. They're all over the place. You can find them everywhere, and just take stock and do that. I think that's a good basis for a healthy marriage. But one of them that I was going to was a guy named David Tripp,
Mm.
and he is a trip. He's a great guy, and he does some really good things on child rearing and marriage and all kinds of relationship things. But one of his sayings that I think is germane to this, and it's very much a corollary or a whatever relation to this, is even a good thing can become a bad thing when it becomes the only thing.
Mm.
And we can intuitively know that that's a valid statement. There's truth in it, and I think that the topic of discussion today is a corollary to that. And that is, if it's not done in perspective, if it's not done within a context, then something that one person might judge as the right thing to do could be exactly the wrong thing to do.
Well, what comes to mind immediately is when, of course, you want your spouse to be the one and only, right? You don't want there to be any mixed messages about that. However, if you have built them up to be your all in all, that no other relationship can help bring fulfillment and kind of substance to your life, add to your well-being, your friend group. If you've put all of your eggs in the basket of your spouse and then something happens to your spouse, you are left utterly destroyed. You have lost the only person that you ever invested into. So you don't have a friend group, you don't have a support group. And so I think that is a powerful statement. And again, not to say that you shouldn't concentrate your efforts on your spouse. I'm not suggesting that at all, but no one person is ever going to be able to fulfill all of your needs. And so that is, I think, the beauty of living in community, which we have had this conversation umpteen times about how critical it is for a diversity of voices in our wheelhouse to be able to bounce things off of, to process with, to grieve with, to have joy with, to walk through hard times with, to figure out the solutions with. Because to your point, if the good thing is the only thing, it's become a bad thing.
That's right. Now, I'm going to differentiate on something you said and
Sure.
do a caveat, and that is there's a great book called "Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am?" And
Mm,
in that book, it says there should be one person in your life that you are completely, utterly, totally honest with. And if you
yeah.
don't have that, then you will not experience growth. be the same person you were at 50 than you were at 30.
Mm,
And you won't have growth. You need to have one person that you're completely honest with. And a good person for that is your spouse.
sure.
So there can be levels of thing, but you're right. Not all encompassing. Not everything
Yeah.
is one person or one thing.
I would almost see it as a yes and, right? I mean,
Yeah,
to have that level of intimacy to say, I trust my spouse with any secret in my closet, of course. And that is the trusted right person to have those conversations with. And as you are aware that you have a wide variety of experiences in your life, you share aspects of your life with other people in an appropriate manner, right? Not to violate intimacy with a spouse and not to violate covenant in any way, but to round out your community.
that's right. And to get other voices and other perspectives in your head. If you're relying on just one person and then the other 2,999 voices in your head only,
Yeah.
then there's some issues there.
The other thing that sounds silly in comparison to I don't know, the serious nature of what we're talking about with spouses and intimacy and all this other stuff. The other item that popped into my mind is habits, and how if the habit is the only thing, it becomes a bad thing, right? Whether that's exercise, it could be a good habit, right? If all I'm going to do is exercise and I'm not going to concentrate in other areas of mental and spiritual and physical well-being, if it's only exercise, it can become a bad thing. You're going to deplete yourself. You're going to, do all kinds of things. If it's the only thing, the good thing becomes the only thing, can lead it to be a bad thing, right?
Yeah, exercise, eating, we all need to eat. That's a good thing. We can do it too much, right?
Sure.
There's any of those things can be can turn into bad things. Any good thing can be a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's just depending again on the context and where your focus is.
Hmm.
You talk about habits, and there's an S on the end of that,
Mm.
right? And so I think a good portfolio of healthy habits
Yeah.
is a really good thing. I've been thinking a lot about the Pomodoro concept, which is, 25 minutes of concentrated effort trying to get into actual flow on a
Yeah.
given subject. And so I have a list of things that I'm trying to establish Pomodoros on each day. And so a Pomodoro to plan your day, a Pomodoro to exercise, a Pomodoro to spend time, quality talking time with your spouse, a certain customer relationship. I mean, there's certain things that I'm trying to establish really good portfolio of
Hmm.
healthy habits, not
Yeah.
just one habit that I think if I do this one thing can, all the time, then the rest of my life's just going to come together, right?
Yeah. Well, so let's transition then, I think, into some of those curious questions that we can ask ourselves when we have the assumption that we're involved in a good thing, whether that's a behavior, a habit, or an interaction with somebody else. We've kind of just gone by default saying this is a good thing. But now if we've got a little bit of pause, what are some of those questions we can ask?
Again, the good thing is already you've made that judgment in your head. So we'll start there and say that it's probably not a bad thing that you're doing in your experience in your life. It's a good thing in
Hmm.
general. Is it a good thing in the situation? Is it a good thing in this relationship? Are there patterns emerging
Mm,
that are yellow flags, not necessarily red flags, but that maybe we should have a look at? And generally, it's going to come down to something that's just not working anymore.
mm,
You're a self-described rescuer.
mhm.
If you have 168 hours in your normal work week, if you're spending 150 of them rescuing one individual at work, that's a problem,
Yeah.
right? And so when it starts to be more than a couple of hours
Mm,
with all the duties you have, then that's a good time to say, hey, is this a good pattern? Is this a
mm.
trend that if it continues is going to be useful or valuable?
Yeah.
Am I adding appropriate value? Are other folks on the receiving end receiving actual value? Um, is that person becoming dependent on this behavior?
Yeah. I think those are some great questions. And then I think about, if I were to be doing the same action in 5 years' time, would I consider it good? Right. So
Hmm.
if whether it's interacting with a child over homework or, taking their forgotten science fair project to school, or it's something altogether different, it's work related. If I'm still doing the same thing, the same good thing in 5 years, will it still be good? Right. And I think that does give a little bit of perspective shift to say, okay, maybe it's good now, but if this continues, it's going to transition into something different.
And the corollary is, how does this fit into the long term
Yeah.
relationship that we want to have? And like with the example of the child,
Yeah.
by age 18, is this going to help this child be able to have their own critical thinking and make good decisions, or at least understand the consequences of their decisions?
Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about health and physical well-being and those kinds of things, I think we can also try to do the good thing, which might be losing weight or getting healthy or cutting out X food. But to me, the follow-up question is it sustainable? And it might be good for now, but if the answer is it's not sustainable and you're going to end up crashing and then gaining back your weight plus more, or finding yourself in a really unhealthy mental space around food, that good thing can definitely turn bad. And so I think obviously the category, where we're engaging in good behavior needs to be evaluated. But I think sustainability is a big question in multiple categories in this regard.
There's a great saying, it applies to diet or exercise or anything like that. What's the right exercise for you? The one that you'll do.
Yeah.
What's the right diet for you? The one that you will consistently execute. And I think that goes for a lot of things along those ways.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think this has been a really intriguing conversation. And I hope, as always, we give everybody a little bit of pause to say, let me think about that. And let me ask some curious questions around that. And we definitely welcome your feedback. You can check in on the YouTube channel, and you can also drop us a line directly through our website, which is curiositynotjudgment.com. And thanks to all of you who have just taken some time just to even drop a note saying, great subject, or I enjoyed listening. We really, really appreciate those of you that just tune in week after week, or even if you're here for the first time, we loved having you, and we always value your voice as well. So just want to say thank you, and I guess we will catch up with y'all next week.